Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm Paul Hammett. I'm a relatively newly appointed National Specialist on Water Resources for the NFU, but I happen to work in Suffolk. So it's my pleasure this afternoon to give you maybe a national view of the farming community, but using exclusively local examples of what farmers here do, how they farm, what they produce, and how they use water and why they need it. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk to you. So it's my aim this afternoon, I guess, to really celebrate what farmers do, particularly in our AONBs in the east, but particularly in the Suffolk Coastal Heaths AONB, which is noted for its irrigated crop production. I'm going to spend some time talking about the farms there. So I've called my bit in this giving you something of a farmer's tale. I find it much better if I can tell you what farmers themselves are doing and you can draw your own conclusions. In telling that story, I think from what I've heard before lunch, I'm going to go for the approach of a story along the lines of Cider with Rosie rather than War and Peace. We'll see how we get on. So by way of context within East Anglia, our food and farming industry here is worth £8 billion, primarily the added value cost to the food industry, the significant processing and manufacturing sector we have here. Let's remember the reason they are here. They're here because they can get a reliable source of high quality raw product. That's in the fruit and vegetables that my farming members grow. And while the Suffolk coast can't really match the sheer output in terms of tons and volumes that a place like the Fens can grow, the Suffolk coast has its own special qualities. I would list four qualities that makes farming out here pretty special. The first is our soil type. We have light sandy soils, relatively disease-free, easy to manage, easy to harvest all year round, easy to get on. That makes it a really good environment for growing our veg. We do have available water, a crucial component, as you will all know, to any plant. Our climate is favourable. We're relatively frost-free here, which means that we can extend the season both early and late, and make a good advantage of providing fruit and vegetables when they might not be abundantly available elsewhere. And the fourth factor is the size and scale of our farm units. They're pretty big, they're pretty specialist, and they're ever so good at working together, which is not what you'll always hear a farm representative say. And so those are the qualities for me of farming in coastal Suffolk. And what they're all about, really, is trying to maximise the amount of food they grow for our society, while at the same time managing the environment, sustaining those habitats we have here that are of international importance. And so there's this two parts of it. Firstly, we're making a contribution to national food security, and a really important contribution. But secondly, we're looking at the contribution to the local economy. This is a picture taken at the Suffolk Food Hall, which, must get those the Suffolk Food Hall. You'll all get a good chance to have a look at this place tonight. It's a really fantastic shop window for what we grow here, and offering maybe an alternative to supermarket retail outlets, all offering best of local produce. The NFU carries out regular surveys amongst our 45,000 farming members. And we regularly talk to our members about the confidence they have in their business going forward. And I think it's fair to say that over the past 12 months, and that business confidence has slipped a bit, if only in the short term. And this infogram is really a demonstration or explanation of when they tell us why their business confidence has dipped and what the underlying reasons behind that. And of all those unpredictable events facing the farming community, for me that bit about the weather really stands out. It's well documented, isn't it? You know, over in the east as well as elsewhere, major drought followed by virtually 12 months of unprecedented rainfall. And, you know, farmers, I think, are in the front line of facing those weather or climatic change risks. Increased frequency and severity of floods and droughts, which puts farmland and their businesses and homes at risk. And yet, interesting, and I think this is useful by this slide, which mentions weather. Because if you walk onto any farm in this county, I would suggest, and talk about climate change, you'll be met likely with something of a blank stare. But ask them about the effects of the weather on their business, and you'll have a much more animated conversation. So it's all about terminology, isn't it? But for us, it's about the water challenge of too much and not enough water. And I was interested in last week's report by the Adaptation Subcommittee that stated that without action, farming could face a 50% shortfall of today's irrigation need by the 2020s. That's big numbers. And the committee went on to say that to address that issue, then we need to see a doubling of the number of reservoir-run farms and halving of the water used to grow crops per hectare. They are stark figures, and that's quite a challenge. But I guess the principles come as a little surprise. Indeed, within NFU, we've been pleased to work closely with the Suffolk Coast and PTAB over the past few years on a project we call Future Landscapes. And this is all about identifying what the climate change risks are to the farming community, the landowners, what can be done to address them, and engaging in that conversation. That's a long road, but I can assure you it started. Now, we've heard already that agriculture uses just 1% of all obstructed water. I think I picked up from Charlie's slide before lunch that in this catchment, or in this region, we're more like 11%, still relatively minor use. But as we've heard, the unique set of criteria for agriculture is that we are consumptive users of water. And we need it, crops need water when there might not be that much about. You know, it's seasonal, it's now, it's when it's hot. This is classic irrigation time. And the other special category, I suppose, of farming is in the way that our use of water is restricted through the licensing system. So the Water Resources Act of 1963, the agency can, although very, very rarely, the agency can restrict irrigation when environmental situation demands. And that's something that farmers uniquely face. So our challenge in the farming community is, how can we make sure that we get a reasonable and fair allocation of water to grow our food? Because we know we will face increasing competition. And we've heard of the competition in future that will come from the need to build more homes and public supply. And with these climate change challenges, the increasing needs of the environment. So there are a few ways that we can tackle this. I'm going to give you a few examples of what farmers are doing. I want to talk firstly about reservoirs. Because in NFU, we think the construction of reservoirs is by far the most important way to increase security and resilience in farmers' need for water. So this is Tim Pratt. He's manager of Wanderson Hall Farms out on the coast. It's a second generation farming business. It's a pretty big enterprise, 1,300 hectares of land, growing typically potatoes, carrots, onions, as well as combined crops. And Tim is stood in front of one of a series of reservoirs that his business has installed over the past 25 years. So farmers are adapting to climate change, as you can see. And this, as I've said, I think is a very important way forward. We think that the proportion of reservoir water locally has risen to 30% of total farmed abstraction in this area, which I think is probably as high as in any local catchment, but it's a reflection of the sophistication of farming just out here. And it's the way that all agriculture needs to go, I would say. It's really important that we move towards displacing reliance on summer water with winter high flow water for obvious reasons. And we need to do more of that. And my reflection is that the farming community has done pretty well in constructing reservoirs. But perhaps we need a more strategic look at where those reservoirs are, who they're built with, who they're built for. And farmers do need help in getting them built in the first place. These are sizable investments. And so, had the Minister stayed for a question or two, I was certainly asked him whether farmers could be offered a taxation incentive, for example. It's very common within business that investment is treated favourably in capital allowances for taxation. Farmers do not benefit from that when building reservoirs, and we really see no reason why they should not. Linked in with fiscal incentives, there are also some ways in which we think we can easily reduce red tape involved in getting these schemes put in place. We tend to find, in all honesty, that farmers are rarely denied or refused permission to build their reservoirs. My goodness, it takes a long time and it's hugely expensive. I'd like to turn briefly to the other side of the coins. We heard from Peter's, it's about demand and supply. In terms of demand management, perhaps in farming we need our version of every crop. Farmers are getting better all the time at the way they use water, and they're getting more efficient all the time. There's always more that can be done. Better techniques, better kit. That's what you see on this photograph. Better scheduling of times and the ways in which water is used, and better benchmarking with it amongst farming businesses. How can we bring the poorer performers up in line with the best? And so in terms of demand management, there's plenty there to go at in terms of research and development, understanding how crops take in water, how they can avoid being too stressed, and transferring the benefit of that research and development by on-farm training to do the job better. This is my slide about collaboration and partnership. These three gentlemen are the three musketeers. The 3Ns is a local marketing group run by these three gents. They work on behalf of a group of local farmers to collaboratively sell their products, and in doing so to partially match the contractual muscle of the buyers. And the man in the middle, that's Richard Pike. He's manager at A.W. Mortier Farms, also on the coast behind me. And it's Richard, I don't know whether they go so far as to talk about all for one and one for all. But I do know that Richard has that sort of philosophy, because Richard is the chair of our local abstractor group, the East Suffolk Water Abstractor Group, ESWAG, which is all about partnership within the farming community. This is a group of farmers, a group of 80 farmers representing 95% of the irrigated crop need out here. They generally look after their members, talk on their behalf, link together in talks with the Environment Agency about prospects for irrigation for the coming year, lay on efficiency training for their members, and when necessary talk about that quite sensitive subject, which is should farmers in drought conditions self-impose restrictions upon themselves, it's what we call voluntary restrictions, in an aim to collectively eke out the limited supply to get them through the whole irrigation year. So, an important role of bringing people together. Richard has another claim to fame, I guess. He happens to be, his business is, I think, still the sole grower in the UK of in-season turnips. Those little white golf balls you might see in the shops from time to time. As far as I'm aware, A.W. Mortier are the only producer of 1,500 tonnes, all hand-picked, although I don't think by Richard personally. But a good example of the very specialist nature of growing out here. And so abstractor groups are quite important, and they are developing in their ambition and their remit to involve other users in it of water in the catchment, not just farmers, to take forward these ideas of catchment management, and to look more, I guess, to work more closely with the Environment Agency on maybe more hands-on management of precious local resources. And that's the sort of example, again, that Charles from the agency gave us before lunch of the Deben pilot project. How can we capture water when we have a lot of it, store it up, use it when there's not enough? And farmers who manage at least 75% of the land here have a central role to play in all that. I want to talk briefly about abstraction licensing, because we're looking very closely within NFU at learning the lessons of the 2010-2012 drought. A drought was a near miss for us because it started raining just in time, but we do need to prepare for the next drought within agriculture. Now, of course, our irrigated crop sector all do so with a license from the Environment Agency. And while that system works pretty well, like anything else, it's potentially subject to improvement. And so I think, bearing in mind those farmers who hold that 11-15% of abstraction here, we want to play a role in how we can make that system better. And we think, to make it better, we're looking for a combination, maybe an impossible combination, but we may as well ask, How can we make the enforcement of water resources both more certain and more flexible? And what role does trading of water between different licence holders play? And finally, I want to touch on land management. This is Richard and Hazel Ridge. They farm 270 hectares of a farm on the Orwell estuary, which overlooks the Port of Felixstowe. As with all the other farms in my tale, their business relies heavily on irrigation for the crops they grow. But being really on the coast, Richard and Hazel also manage 52 hectares of grazing marsh under a succession of agri-environment schemes, looking very carefully at how the rural, low-maintenance seawalls might or might not work in the future, and what options there might be in the longer term for realigning that bit of coastline. And nicely dovetailing all they do with producing food, managing the environment, and bringing in their own business opportunities for diversification by setting up firstly bed and breakfast and then a series of holiday cottage lets, and it all works in together quite beautifully. And so that's what I virtually want to leave you with. A vision which Richard and Hazel are, I think, pretty typical farmers out here who are seeking to combine growing our food to the highest possible standards with managing the environment around them. And it is all about this combination. How can we manage our demand better within agriculture? How can we steadily year on year improve the amount of more secure storage water we've got? And how do we get that really important link between national food security and national water security? Because our government makes some pretty good comments and statements about the need for us to be more secure in the food that we produce, but we cannot do that unless we are more secure in the water that we have to grow those crops. And I think that if we can get that combination of supply, demand, leadership, strategic link, then farmers in this kind of area and elsewhere can rise to the challenges ahead. Thank you, Chair.